Hello, everyone out there. My name is Charo Neville, and I'm the curator of the Kamloops Art Gallery, and I'm honored to be joined by the 5 artists in Holding a Line in Your Hand, along with the gallery's Education and Public Programs Director, Emily Hope, who's providing some technical support in the background. So thank you so much for choosing to spend your afternoon with us today through this virtual coming together. As we gather across the wires, I'm speaking to you from my office at the Kamloops Art Gallery, which is situated on the unceded territory of the Kamloops Te Secwepemc within Secwepemc Ulu, the ancestral lands of the Secwepemc people. All of this land, what we refer to as Kamloops and beyond, spanning over 180,000 square kilometers across the interior plateau of what we call British Columbia, is Secwepemc Ulu. As a settler, I acknowledge my immense privilege in benefiting from this occupied territory. Through our exhibitions and programs at the gallery, we see strength in coming together to amplify Indigenous voices and more generally marginalized voices, and in having difficult conversations. Programs like today's offer frameworks for sharing knowledge and resources and promoting cultural and intellectual exchange and access to art. So today's conversation will be about an hour long. You can submit any questions that you might have through the Q&A box, and we'll address these at the end of our conversation. And you're also encouraged to chat amongst yourselves and with us through the chat window. And if you choose to send a message to all panelists, then it will be visible to all 6 of us. Or you can choose to send a message to all panelists and attendees, which will be visible to everyone. So we wanted to visually situate us for those of you who haven't had a chance to see the exhibition. And so Emily is going to start playing a slideshow of images, documentation of the exhibition, and I'm going to read the exhibition text, giving a sense of each of the artists' practice. So Holding a Line in Your Hand presents the work of 5 Canadian women painters from different cultural backgrounds at different stages in their careers, and based at opposite ends of the country. Azadeh Elmizadeh, Colleen Heslin, Russna Kaur, Lyse Lemieux, and Rajni Perera's work contain divergent methodologies, but also strong affinities. The exhibition includes artwork abundant in color, line, and texture, embedded with and unencumbered by ideas. The focus on a small group of female painters offers a renewed perspective on a historically male-dominated genre and reflects today's growing number of female artists working in the medium. Exploring and expropriating the idea of the painting in a myriad of ways, these artists share an expanded approach to painting. Holding a Line in Your Hand speaks to a resurgence of painting in Canada and an active dialogue around historical precedents and contemporary approaches. Many of the works integrate textiles as part of a conversation about their everyday use, formal possibilities, and historically gendered associations. Other works interweave cultural tradition and storytelling, including the futurities of science fiction. And the title of the exhibition, Holding a Line in Your Hand, borrows a phrase from the way Lyse Lemieux has described her artistic process, which for all of the artists in the exhibition implicates the body. Figures appear in much of the work, both through representation and abstraction, offering a bodily presence. Rajni Perera's work, which you see here, is conceivably the most figurative of all the works in the exhibition, yet her figures are not clearly identifiable. Born in Sri Lanka and now based in Toronto, Ontario, Perera explores issues of hybridity, futurity, ancestry, immigrant identity, monsters, and dream worlds through multimedia installations. And these themes come together in what Perera calls a newly objectified realm of mythical symbiosis. Perera's dancer series, included in this exhibition, emerged in 2018 from an exploration of the aesthetic of science fiction and an interest in body dynamics. These figures metaphorically extend from the frame and come alive in a site-specific painting made directly on the gallery's wall. These larger-than-life, vividly colored and intertwined hybrid figures speak to Perera's immigrant experience of otherness in Canada, inhabiting an otherworldly, fantastical space. Russna Kaur was born in Toronto, Ontario, and is now based in Vancouver, BC, where she received a Master's in Fine Arts from Emily Carr University of Art and Design in 2019, and where she's now a faculty member. Kaur's work in the exhibition begins on the exterior banner outside the gallery. Her interest in the mechanics and materiality of painting is evident in large-scale works comprised of multiple panels that often change composition depending on the context. Kaur uses surface materiality to address complex personal and cultural narratives that evoke the cultural significance of color within her Punjabi community, where she has described color as a marker of energy and joy, but also as a mask for intergenerational trauma. Kaur uses line to make her paintings visually cohesive, and line also acts metaphorically in her work as a common thread to connect the fragments of personal narrative, holding it together. Colleen Heslin's work similarly considers art history and social histories, integrating an awareness of gender and labor into abstraction. In a new body of work presented for the first time in this exhibition, Heslin's abstraction draws on spiritual meditation paintings from the 17th century Hindu tantras of Rajasthan, India, 19th century Amish quilt designs, along with 1960s minimalism. Using a sparse color palette and repeated shapes and lines, Heslin describes these paintings as mapping energy through color and form. Containing only the essential information and vibrating with line and color, Heslin's meditations encompass the vital energy necessary for life, evoking natural phenomenon, including the light of the sun, the glow of the moon, and the cycles of a day and a season. Seemingly simple, the sheer scale of each work in relation to the body and the optical effects of line and color extend these meditative vibrations to the viewer's experience. Having attended art school in the 1970s, Lyse Lemieux's practice reflects a honed approach and the lived experience of paintings evolving in significance and resurgence. Her interdisciplinary practice has focused strongly on drawing and includes sculpture, painting, and installation. Through considerations of process and materiality, Lemieux's explorations probe the space between abstraction and representation as they relate to the human figure. The motif of the black tunic she wore as a girl in Catholic school appears repeatedly in her work, each line working through memory. Her awareness of working as a woman artist is never directly addressed, but is embedded within each work and is part of a relational conversation between works. Revealed in her statement, "I need to hold the line in my hand," Lemieux's visual language is graphic, motivated by line, bodily gesture, and optical effect. Azadeh Elmizadeh is a recent Master's of Fine Arts graduate from Guelph University in Guelph, Ontario. And before that, she received a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Ontario College of Art and Design University in Toronto, Ontario. Elmizadeh's large-scale paintings incorporate the subtlety of abstract color fields with figuration, where a narrative appears as if through an atmospheric haze of lush color. Often figures are shown doing acts of care like gardening. Drawing on her Iranian heritage, many of Elmizadeh's works incorporate Sufi cosmology and conventions of Persian miniature painting. Unlike the detailed illustrative renderings in these miniatures, however, Elmizadeh's paintings are to scale with the human body, consuming in their presence and enigmatic in their subject matter. Steeped in had to include this one. Steeped in centuries-old academic traditions, painting has long been revered as the highest art form. As artists have pushed up against tradition over the past 150 years, the objective of a painting, what comprises a new painting movement, and what is considered a masterpiece worthy of the canon has shifted dramatically. Through holding a line in your hand, these 5 leading women artists convey a diverse view of painting today while sharing the expansive possibilities of this long venerated medium. And there we all are with our executive director, Margaret Kremka, at our opening in July. So thank you for sharing that, Emily. We were fortunate to have all of the artists with us in July for the opening, and some were here for a week to install their work and join us for an opening tour. And so through this kind of coming together and connecting, we all felt quite invigorated, I think, from that experience. So we thought that this, we could try to replicate that in some form virtually today, instead of doing individual artist talks, by sharing this group conversation with you. So here I am. Maybe you all want to just wave. We have Lyse Lemieux, Azadeh Elmizadeh, Rajni Perera, Colleen Heslin, and Russna Kaur. And so they're all joining us from different places in Canada, in different time zones. I'm going to start our conversation by the commonality that you all share, which is being women artists. And that is very much the framework that I was looking at for the exhibition. So I'm wondering for you, all of you, what being a woman artist today means. And I'm thinking specifically with the choice to be a painter or use paint and the weight of painting in the canon, and how your work might address this history or not. So don't all jump in at once, but one of you can take a stab at it.
Okay, I can try. I went to school at OCAD University, and when I was going to school there, it was really white and male, and like, you know, at the top of the heap was like, I don't want to name a name, but it was like a young male white painter who came from an affluent family who was like, he was running the game. So if you can imagine being like this little colored girl at like this kind of, at that time, the institution is looming, it's large. And then there's like this prime example of white men painters who's at the top of, you know, the Toronto art game. And this is when, of course, I'm starting to go out to like shows and stuff, right? Like, I didn't even know that I had to go to those when I started art school. I had no idea that you had to be in a scene or go into the scene. And I'm still not in the scene. But it was like, you know, trying that out and seeing that, and like, and then realizing just, and it's also like, oh, I want to make the differentiation between being a woman of color painter and just being a woman painter. That's very completely different, but like it kind of might answer your question a little bit. But like going out there and like also like seeing what was out there being put out by white male painters and realizing how little I was interested in that artwork whatsoever. It technically wasn't strong, it was mediocre at best. I went into school, I've been painting since I was a baby. So by the time I get to school, I'm just a good painter. Like I know that because I painted all the time, right? Just like big, strong painting muscles. So going in there and being like, these guys are doing what? They're selling their paintings for what? Like, I just didn't really understand that. Like, that was really wild to me, and like getting to know this whole thing. But that was my experience kind of coming out of school, even with like having this coming from a crazy long tradition of intricate and elaborate painting and painted works and textile and like artisanal objects, and then expecting that, I don't know how to say this, like if someone's at the top of a game and someone is at the top of some hierarchy of painting and art making, I'm expecting a skill level and not really finding that. So that was my feeling on being a woman of color painter, coming from like with ancestral skill and everything that I know it moves through me, being there and like having my work referred to as being Oriental, like the word Oriental was used to describe my work once at school, and like exotic and all this other crazy crap by like, you know, old white guys, and just being like, what are you doing here? This is crazy. So I just kind of thought it was funny, but I couldn't be less interested. Like, I evolved my work completely outside of what I was seeing happening, coming from like the status quo white male painter.
Russna, I'm seeing you nod your head. Did you have a similar experience?
Well, it just made me think about, when Rajni mentioned like textiles and just intricate design and being so aware of that and surrounded by that, like my whole life as well. My mom, we've had this conversation before, but she used to design Indian bridal wear. And so I kind of grew up surrounded by all of these textiles and very intricate designs, lots of attention to detail, lots of layering, layering various textures to create movement. And so I think these things, sometimes we're not even aware of them, but because we're surrounded by them all the time, they make their way into our work. And so for me, within my work, I also find myself sometimes, stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. My work is quite large scale, but then also in the process of making, becoming hyper aware of minor details that might not even be obvious to some, but are kind of like they glare out at me. But it also just kind of to answer your question in general, I would say for me, painting or, making is definitely, I get this sense of freedom, and it's almost a space that I can enter where it's completely my own, and I don't necessarily have to justify what I'm doing in the studio when I'm making. I'm making because of my own, personal things that drive me and motivate me. And I think growing up, I didn't always feel that I had that freedom or just ability to be like, no, I want to do it this way, or I'm going to do it my way. It was kind of always like, being careful with what I say, and, trying to maybe sometimes not even voicing my opinion because, afraid that it would come off as like disrespectful, or, kind of keeping a lot of my true feelings inside. And so for me, painting is this space where I don't have to be quiet anymore, and I can actually say a lot through my work without even having to necessarily verbally say something. I think just the act of creating large scale paintings, or not being afraid to use bright, bold colors, and, playing around with texture, all of these things, in my opinion, they sometimes speak way louder than I can use in my voice. And so for me, painting definitely, especially as like a woman painter, painting has given me that voice that I feel like maybe I haven't always had.
Do you find that too, Azadeh?
Yeah, well, I also kind of had some familiar experiences, as both Rajni and Russna explained. I also went to OCAD, and like that feeling of disconnection was there. But Russna mentioned freedom, and I think it's something that I also like to think about when I paint. Even though we're women, we don't like being a woman is one layer among many other things that makes up who we are. And I don't think I ever make decisions in the studio thinking that like I'm consciously making painting only as a woman. It's a way of being and navigating the world that finds its way into your work, maybe intuitively. But also, one thing that one thing that's there in this exhibition and in work of all of the artists who are showing is the significance of color, and Rajni mentioned like the Oriental, and Rasna also, I can see how she's, like comfortable with the use of color in her work. And we kind of know that, like from a Western perspective, color is associated with like feminine or Oriental, or even like at times vulgar. And I think the reference that you may also be familiar with is Chromophobia by David Batchelor, in which like he explains how like from the Western perspective, historically color has been thought of as a source of contamination or even pollution, because there's something ambiguous, unknown, uncontainable about it. And I don't know, I think personally I had to come in terms with that aspects of color, like it's ambiguous qualities or its expressiveness. So yeah, I think that's my
Colleen or Lyse, did you have anything to say about, I mean, I'm asking this also from a generational perspective, right?
I'm gonna let Colleen go first, seeing
Yeah.
I'm the oldest here, and I'll finish off with after Colleen.
Well, yeah, just picking up on that idea of color as contamination, that's definitely something that I'm looking at in my practice, because it literally is, like, globally with working with dye, and looking at different areas that it contaminates is often more vulnerable communities. I do think of myself as an artist first. So and then I find it curious what meaning or like political implications will be read into like based on the materials that you're using, depending on, I guess, the gender of the maker. And it is surprising to me that some of that history of gender in painting, how strong it is, and it's just really surprising to encounter that in current educational systems. I was surprised when I did my MFA. But even just symbols like, a large brush and whatnot, it just seemed kind of surprising to me that somehow that is a gendered thing. Or like even just the idea of like scale having a gender, that it, like, if you're doing something large or small, that so I find that curious.
That's what's so, as there's 35 years difference between some of us. And for me, it's actually sad to think that there's still that difference between genders, and it exists because, as all of us agree, in the studio making, you don't think about that. It's once you put the work out there, and once the work has a life of its own, that all of a sudden it seems to fall into the context of gender. Not always, but often. And that's unbelievable in a lot of ways to me, that in the 70s, when I was first taking feminist studies, that I would never have thought that 35 years later, 40 years later, that this would still be something that we're talking about. And I think that's true of gender. It's true of all the cultural concerns and the cultural issues going on. We still see very few people of color showing. It's predominantly white. The art world is a pretty funny place to live in all around. So, and I would have thought naively 40 years ago that all of this would not be an issue. And it still is. When you step out of the studio, there is that, as Azadeh says, there is that disconnect no matter what. And shows like this, I think, are obviously trying to bridge all of that. But sadly, it's still a reality.
When I was doing my research, it really seemed apparent to me that there are many women who are painting right now. So I don't know what that says. Is that your experience in the schools, or and in terms of the work that you're all seeing? I don't know what that says. I mean, for me, the exhibition was really like a microcosm of something larger that I was seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Also a return to painting generally, right? So maybe there's just more women artists.
Yeah, I think that there are like whoever, I mean, we have to be careful, I think, not to like negate all of the hardship that was faced by like women artists who like came before us and like kicked doors down and screamed at everybody. And we're just like, oh, thank goodness. I mean, I'm sure Lyse was one of these people who was just like, fuck this, sorry. You know, like you get to a point, there was someone got angry before we were able to be here and talk about these things and talk about how there's more women painters than ever before, right? So that's thanks to a lot of hard, crazy work by a lot of amazing women artists in general who had to deal with a lot more nonsense than we've had to deal with. It's still there, but I think it's a compound factor of like less nonsense, hard work by our predecessors, more confidence in female gendered or female gender ascribing people in general. I would love to see more trans painters, way more trans painters and artists coming, like being put in the forefront, not as tokens, like really just like everyone together, all together now. So it's like that all together now it's always the work of like fighting all these crazy fighting spirits, right? Forever and ever, like their job was never done. So now we can do it. We can keep taking it forward.
And I think that happens when the curators and the directors and the gallery owners are those people that you're talking about, you know, are the women and are the trans and so the more those people, the more there's a diversity in who is part of that system that we are working with, the more the work is going to get out. If it hadn't been for Charo putting us together, this work would not be out there, you know?
Yeah.
And that's maybe the difference, Rajni, when I, 40 years ago, when I was doing it, I was lucky that some of the guys were noticing the work, so it was like trying to convince, it's like different levels of convincing and of exposure and of getting those conversations going. So now there's a lot more possibility, I think, for your generation to have those conversations. So yes, you're right. There is a difference, and there was a lot of door bashing, and there was a lot of stuff that was happening. But still, I'm still surprised that I hear, some of you talking about that. I just could never have thought that was still going to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, bigotry hangs on tightly.
Yeah, and they're the loudest, aren't they? Yeah.
They really believe in that old way. It's sick. It's kind of sick,
Yeah, can I go back to your question too about painting? As you know, I don't think of myself as a painter, but then I don't know what I think of myself as. I just think of myself as a person who makes things. So I know that for me, painting and painting on canvas, which is, as I've said before, was really odd because I use fabric. Colleen, I'm sure you don't define yourself as a painter, or maybe you do define yourself, Colleen. I'm not sure if you define yourself as a painter. I think of you as a maker. I also of things, I think of you actually almost more in sculptural terms than I do as a painter, although I totally get the painting thing. But I know that for me, the pandemic brought working at home and brought out color in a way that was and intricate work in a way that I couldn't have expected. I don't know. I still to this day I'm trying to figure out why that happened. But I'm not sure if painting, if all of Russna, I certainly think of you as a more of an object maker and an object maker. You make things on the wall, and I think of myself as that way too. And same with Colleen and Rajni, definitely as well. Although we're all interested. Azadeh, I probably think of you as a painter more than any of us. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I love painting, to be honest. And my engagement with painting started at the material level. I was interested in the things that paint can do, the way that it can transform into all these different qualities and sensations. So I was comfortable with the traditional framing of the canvas or the stretcher. But my problem was the history of painting, its canon. And because I didn't know much about Western art history when I came here to Canada, or I had like on the surface knowledge or understanding of it. And when I educated myself, I kept struggling to think of the Western canon as a support for my work. It didn't make much sense. So that's where I started thinking about like an expansive approach to painting could be also expanding the canon, or think about framing of your work as a methodological approach to think about or to carve out some space for lesser told histories, narratives, or languages. And yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing work, you know, like each history has its gaps or has its problems that you keep have to like have a critical lookout for, whatever canon that we're talking about. But I think yeah, like I had to do the research, and I had to delve into the histories of miniature painting, its underlying philosophical, theological ideas to kind of um, um, create that framework, you know, for new ways of thinking about painting, or to write about painting or experiencing the object of the painting. But yeah, I think I'm pretty much a painter. I think of myself
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
What about
Colleen, do
you,
you think of
Colleen?
yourself
Yeah.
as a painter?
I think about how constructed the canon of art history and painting is a lot, and I'm really grateful right now that there is so much work, especially publications by women, that you to consume, and that there's almost in this moment where we can start like devising our own canons, really, like rewriting them and having moments where your teaching really opens up these opportunities of reframing the canon, and because it really isn't something that it needs to be accepted at a base level. It really is something that was constructed, and that to me is really empowering, that the more people who get involved actively in that kind of research and like sharing of the work that's influencing them. Yeah, it's an exciting moment right now, I think.
I was thinking about this notion of the expanded possibilities of painting, and then each of you in your intentional approach to the frame specifically. So a lot of people come to the gallery and they expect a painting show to be framed paintings on the wall. And so I think that this exhibition looks quite unconventional and from that standpoint. And of course, then there's this inclusion of all these other materials, and there's objects in the exhibition. There's a lot of visitors who've been coming in and they're quite sad that the wall paintings will be painted over. So I was thinking about the history of frescoes, or even like Diego Rivera's like mural paintings. And then there's this temporal quality about that fact that they only exist for a short amount of time. So I think like the fixed nature of a painting is not what you're going to get in this exhibition, and that was what was exciting to me about all of your work. And that you can read each of your areas, as you could see through the images, as more installations, right? So there's communication between your works too. So that's a lot to put out there, but I think that was definitely what I wanted to show, instead of landscapes or portraits, or, you know, something expected.
Yeah. And I think that, sorry if I can
No,
jump in,
jump right
but
in.
I think that the wall extensions are really exciting because it's like a direct response to the space, I find. And with this exhibition, I have two works in there that I had previously shown, you know, a couple years ago, and the wall painting behind the work was quite different. but I kind of started to like the idea of thinking about, you know, the paintings as like these living things, right? Like if we think about how we experience life or how we go through life, like we're the same person, but depending on the situation that we're in, we grow, or we change our opinions, we change our perspectives. And so with the painting, I mean, another like thing that I'm really excited by is, you know, depending on where the painting is situated, almost treating that as a way, you know, for the painting to have an opportunity to grow as well. So the painting that I showed 2 years ago is the same painting, yes, but maybe how it's responding to the space around it is very different. And that for me opens up a lot when you look at a painting or a work that you've done as a very specific moment in time, and how that can grow as time goes on and change as you change as a person and as an artist as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say that with what Russna does with the painting is that this also responds to a specific place too, you know, like the exhibition spaces that you go in and create work. It seems like it's a specific response to the site. It's circumstantial, you know, it could changes from one place to another. And like making in the studio is also circumstantial. Sometimes you have the option to work on a stretched canvas, and sometimes you don't, you know, like you move from one place to another, and you start considering like other ways of making things and being able to carry them around with you. I don't know. So, yeah.
For the mural that I did for the exhibition, often it's an example of how sometimes I'm actually out of where, like if a lot of stuff is loaned out, like remember Charo, we were trying to go through like everything that we could put in, and like we did these beautiful multiples, and then you had the whole wall and you're just like, remember the AGYU piece. Yeah, and do large figurative. And it's like sometimes it's as a result of like not having the big work for a big, like the scale to match a place, right? Like sometimes you cannot respond because your time is out, your production schedule is loaded. We're all busy, right? Like we're all there kind of. So it's like sometimes I will do that, and I will respond to the space by way of a large scale temporal wall painting, because like the logistics are not working, as I said, like it's not, you know, it's a way to respond to an invitation that is not, you don't have to like somehow time travel 6 months back and like create work. And oftentimes with an exhibition like this, like the way that it was put together, and what an awesome exhibition I think it is, I wish I had like a year. Rosters don't work like that. I know that, like it's never like that, or it's very, very hard to do it. But like sometimes you're just out of time, and you gotta like, you know, think about something that is, and in my case, it was something that pertained to the place, to Kamloops itself, right? So I got to respond in kind of real time at a large scale with a big idea. So that's the
and we all were talking about how experimental the exhibition was too. I mean, I was talking to each of you individually, bringing you together. And then, of course, once all the work was together, then you had to negotiate space in a lot of cases. And there's a lot of relationships that happen between the works that we couldn't have imagined.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels very like a living, breathing thing in itself, right? The exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to travel? Are you guys going to travel that thing?
There's no plans to at this moment.
Who the heck is traveling, Rajni?
The what?
Who the heck is traveling?
Oh man, I just want to all get together again and like
I know.
burgers and have nice drinks.
That's right. I just wanted to add to that too, Charo, that for me, which is really odd because here was a huge, beautiful space with huge walls where normally I would have loved to have done a huge installation. And yet I really wasn't at this point wanting to do that, which is very odd. And it was an opportunity odd for me, I mean, but it was an opportunity to see what kind of conversations I could get going between individual smaller works. And that was a great opportunity too, to see how that would function inside, not just my own the conversation between pieces, but the conversations with the rest of the artists in the show. And sometimes we have a need for that too, you know, where we've been living with things, or we've made a group of new work and we think, I'd really like to see how these things work together. And I'm thankful for that opportunity as well, because that doesn't always happen.
I also think that with the wall painting, and maybe Rajni, I don't know how you feel about this, but it's also, for me, it seems in some ways, even though the walls are sometimes massive, but it kind of takes a little bit of pressure off when you want to experiment with something new, because it has this temporary feeling, right? So if you try something and it doesn't work out exactly how you thought it would, it's going to be gone in a couple of weeks, right? So I know for this show specifically, I was definitely experimenting with what I was extending on the walls, especially if I'm thinking about that far back piece, the one that's beside Colleen's. And I'd never done anything like that before, but I was like, you know what, this is the perfect opportunity to try something like that and see how it goes.
Emily, do you want to pop that up just for a second? Continue.
Yeah. And so it's just a way, you know, treating the wall as another surface to play and to experiment. And, you know, trying to maybe get away from painting feeling like this static fixed thing that, you know, can't, you know, change once it's done. It's not the case with extending work onto the wall. And sometimes the work that's extended onto the wall will, you know, fuel the work that I make in the future. So if I feel like it's done its job on the wall, I can bring that onto a canvas and continue to play around with the surface. And, you know, because I work in this very modular way, you know, breaking the surface, and, you know, if certain parts of the painting are not working, I can eliminate those surfaces, bring some new surfaces in. And sometimes those eliminated surfaces will become its own painting. So it's kind of continuing this, I don't know, sense of play with the work and not having to take everything so seriously.
And this is a good example too of the negotiating that had to happen between you and Colleen, as you immediately saw you had planned for another group of panels and wall painting to happen on that wall where Colleen's rope work is. And then you both realized it needed that space.
Yes. Yeah,
I
and
think this was a brilliant solution, by the way. I don't know if I've said this to you guys.
It really needed to happen.
This was just fabulous. And it worked not just in that corner, it worked right across that whole space, and you know, sort of spilling into even as you look at Colleen's piece and Russna's piece, it spills over even behind into mine. And I just thought this Colleen's rope piece here, I think, looks just terrific with this corner. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt there, but I just thought that was a brilliant piece of curating and negotiation.
Well, it really was them just realizing in the space that it wasn't working, because we literally had just installed Russna's panels. It was taking up that whole wall where the rope work is, and
wow,
yeah, so it got moved.
Well, it looks great.
Yeah, and looking at those images too, you can see that relationship between the line and the color so well too. But it all starts looking like an installation. So, I mean, you were all so gracious too in accommodating that. Like, there was no way to have discrete rooms for each of you. And I didn't want it to look like that either.
No.
Yeah.
No. I thought the relationships too between Colleen's work in the other space with your stretched pieces, Colleen, really worked well again with Russna's work. And going through, when you stood in the, I'm sorry, I don't know the gallery that we're looking at here, if that I can see.
Yeah, the first one.
Yeah, the first one with Rajni's pieces is, you know, you always got little windows and glimpses into other spaces, and that informed the work and conversed with all the pieces as well. The one thing too, speaking, we were talking about color, but I think line is the other big connection between all of us. Even Azadeh, with your work too, and especially I thought with the installation, the silk, the small pieces, which are just stunning. Well, all the work was stunning, but the stunning, that piece that we see here is, again, you know, the line and the grid that comes back in a number of our pieces is repeated there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, with that book, it's also the what's the thing, like the scripture that I've included in each small frame, like not all of them, but I think about that, you know, it's also a way of drawing or addressing drawing into the frame of the painting. That I've been thinking of incorporating maybe later into the paintings as well. But yeah, you're right. I haven't really, I hadn't really thought about that, like the significance of line and the grid in these works. Now that you mentioned it, and now that I'm comparing it with the paintings of Collins in the, you know, in the other room, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. The other thing for all of us too, that seems to be a common refrain is we're kind of all telling stories in a certain way, sometimes more formally than others, some of us more formally than others, but there's a lot of storytelling going on there, no matter whether or not the narrative is linear is irrelevant. But that seems to happen quite a bit too with all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking about in bringing you all together too. But it would what I like about all of your work is that it's I would say mostly appears abstract at first, and then those things emerge, like the narratives or the representation, and I mean even. Colleen, yours is probably the most obviously abstract, but then you really, you're thinking about all kinds of things, but there is a story there for you. And then there's also the body is present, even though you don't represent the body. Like for me, standing in front of one of your paintings is like, I feel the size of my scale in relation to it. So there's, yeah, back to like what a painting can be. It's the representation seems to be there, but in these kind of in subtle ways, and then also not very subtle ways, right?
There's like an intimacy in the 100 times why, that the little silk grid that I found really refreshing in the whole exhibition, because there is so much there and it is in such a large scale, and just the bringing it into a smaller scale. I found that part of the exhibition really helpful and refreshing.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the placing of that piece too. I think it gave the piece some quietness for contemplation, and it's the only work that I've done that is not on stretched canvas. But as I said, I mean, it's circumstantial. It happened during the time where I couldn't be in the studio, but I wanted to work with something that I could carry around with me, you know, wherever I went. So it changed. And now that I'm leaving Toronto and I'm going to be, I don't know, like traveling for the next 6 months, I'm thinking of probably going smaller again, probably working on a stretched canvas. I mean, it's all the response to the life. Like you gotta change. Yeah.
But I think that's when exciting things happen. Like when you're kind of slightly uncomfortable in the studio, I think that's a good sign. Because even I was doing a residency last year at the Centrum Foundation in Washington State. And that was the first time I had worked on unstretched material. and I didn't even know how to approach the surface. And it was so different than what I was used to. But in the end, it actually opened up a completely new process for me. And now, even though I'm kind of back in my own studio, I still find that I'm working in that way. That came as a result of just having to travel or having to move, a large scale painting and roll it up and, stitch it when I got back. And so I think sometimes these inconveniences open up a lot and for the better.
Mm,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say to everyone who's watching right now that if you want to start putting questions in the Q&A, go right ahead. I see a few people have done so now. And we'll kind of just maybe wrap up if any of you had anything else to say. I've got some questions that people have submitted in advance as well, but we can get to some of those.
Mhm.
Shall you just go ahead?
Yep.
Okay. Lise, we have a specific question for you from a fellow artist. Do you sketch in advance of your paintings, or do you create the composition directly on the canvas? Probably knowing about your drawing practice here.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, well, my drawing practice was pretty expanded too. So, and it was always a very direct sort of way of working. So no, the short answer is no, I don't stretch out. I don't sketch out at all. I think usually I start thinking I know what I'm going to work on, and I have this specific kind of, either I have a color or I have a gesture that I want to work with, and as I'm doing it, it transforms and it keeps transforming and it keeps transforming and it keeps telling me where to go. So I have to be very attentive to my own process. It's been strange, as I said earlier, working on cloth rather than cutting cloth and not working with paper. But I say strange, and yet I don't mean strange at all, because it felt absolutely natural and really, really comfortable. And it still does. I'm not sure. I have a feeling that I'm going to be introducing new materials onto the canvas in the next little while. But again, nothing is hugely deliberate. Sometimes I take, like for the pieces that were in this show, there was a few of them that were drawings that I had started and made on paper. And when I remade them on the canvas, they became quite different. But the starting point was drawings on paper. But you would never guess, looking at them now, if you looked at the drawing and you looked at the painting, you probably wouldn't guess that they were the same pieces.
Mhm.
I have another question actually from Amy Modell, who's currently showing in the Cube Gallery, and she just wanted all of you to speak to these material choices and what she was asking what these choices say. Maybe, Colleen, we were referring to the fact that you dye your canvases or dye your fabric. So that might be a good starting point.
Yeah, for me, I was thinking more about the surface and wanting a softer surface, or it was having just a moment where I was finding paint, the plasticity of paint was not something that I was, I guess going towards something that was lighter, and trying to figure out how to get that vibrancy of the color. I also like working with water, I find water really like fascinating to the marks that it makes, but also just that you can have something that is very vibrant and strong, but also very thin. And then that there's the chemical bonding of the color where it's bonding with the fiber. I find that really interesting as well. And it's something about making just like a deep interest in color, but making like the physicality of it, like just, yeah, that I don't get it. It's still, I find it still exciting. There is a bit of a magic to that. That I haven't gotten exhausted with it, and there's a tactile quality that you just relates to the everyday, just in is very linked to like clothing and objects that we're familiar with, and I found that helps. It's like this open access point for engaging with abstraction, something that people can find sometimes very confusing, or there's a distant, or that there's something there that they're not getting. That having the material that I'm using, there's this familiarity to it that is a bit disarming, which I find a refreshing way to experience an artwork.
Rajni, you're probably among all of you, the artist who uses the most different kinds of materials, and I would say your practice is more sculptural.
Okay, that's an interesting way to say it.
Well, I saw you on Instagram. You showed a video recently too of like all the painting
more
that you do.
sculpture.
Yeah.
I'm like super results oriented, and as a result, I kind of like toss up the hierarchy of materials that's institutionally steeped. Like, I don't care. So I didn't like canvas, and I didn't like oil paints because everybody was using it and it stank and it never dried, and I was just like, I can't do this. This is crazy. And it was like, because I paint fast, so like everything, you know what, a lot of the stuff that I use, it's geared towards my speed of work, which is fast. I work pretty fast. I'm not bragging. Sometimes not good where I'm just done and I'm just like, oh, I don't want to work on this anymore, even though I could clearly use another 12 hours or so. I'm just like, I don't want to. Done. So I use a lot of new materials. I use a lot of the paint I use is acrylic gouache, and that's normally Japanese companies. That's very finely milled, like exquisitely made product. So, and it'll dry quickly in the color that it says, so I'm not messing around later. And it dries very flat and matte, and that responds to all my influences of anime, manga, background, set painting, of animation, science fiction, concept artwork. Like, I always checked out how they were doing it before I started looking into my materials for it. This is just the flat work. And then for sculpture, I started off using polymer clay, Sculpey. Like, if you go on YouTube and you put in like, Incredible Hulk figurine made at home, it's Sculpey. It's always going to be like the polymer clay that you just put in your oven in your house. And because I didn't have any money to have access to kilns and ceramic and like all of that, like you actually need like lots of cash and time to do ceramics and like to do clay, traditional, all those traditional ways of doing traditional museum accepted and preferred ways of making work. But I started with polymer clay, which you stuff with aluminum foil and aluminum armatures, and you can do it all in your house, and that's what I had to do, right? So a lot of I use a lot of new materials because they're friendlier for me. I can do them myself without relying on anyone else or facilities, and it's dried and cured pretty quickly. Now it's so funny. Like, I just did a piece. I did a new bust for Ottawa, for the National Gallery, and I found this bronze coat. Like, it's a paint that contains all the metals of bronze inside it. And then you can dry it and you can do patinas. Like, you can treat it like bronze and brass. And I was like, oh my God, the whole game is changing again. So I really love researching new materials and like weird, funny new material science. It's exciting for me because I love science anyway, and chemistry and stuff, right? So like, I'm into it. Even though they're like, oh, it's a little smelly, or like, oh, it acts weird. I'm like, oh, yeah, I want that.
Anybody else want to talk about their material choices?
Yeah, I feel like I kind of use a little bit of everything as well. And a lot of my sketches or my kind of mock-ups for the larger scale work specifically, when you're sketching digitally, which is something that I do quite often, things tend to be extremely flat and graphic. And so when I'm coming to the actual work, I want to get as far away from that as possible. And so it all started off with things that I had on hand. So, there's a piece in the show that's actually beside Colleen's work with the green wall painting extended on the back. But that piece is made up of, paper cutouts and felt and crayons, oil pastel, marker, found pieces of wood. There's a couple different textiles that I've used, canvas being one of them, but then also utilizing materials that were much more familiar to me before canvas was really in the picture. And, so there's some raw silk, there's these cotton blend fabrics, velvet, there's also cut canvas and acrylic paint, spray paint, latex, so it's kind of like house paint. So it is quite literally a little bit of everything, but I think, that kind of almost collaged way of working just comes natural to me. And I feel like if I look to my trajectory, to arriving at painting, everything that I've done leading up to it has taught me something different. Whether it was experience working with my mom in her clothing design studio, or my experiences, studying biology for a number of years, or, then moving into kind of more commercial textiles and surface design. I feel like every step along the way, if we kind of look back on our lives, we pick up certain things from different times. And I feel like my paintings right now are very much an accumulation of all of that information and all of that material experience. And it kind of manifests itself in these very collaged way or modular way of painting. Almost like I think of my paintings sometimes as these like puzzle pieces that come together or don't come together perfectly, but yeah.
I'm just seeing I've got two other questions here, just to let everyone know, and it's 2:00, so we'll just keep going, but I want to be sure that we answer these other questions as well. Here, the first one is, I feel that the wall paintings distract from the actual work and it takes away from the individual power of the painting. Wondering if this is crossed anyone's mind. So this is probably directed to Rajni and Russna.
Mm-hmm.
What
Yeah.
did they
A
think?
lot to take in.
They feel distracted by our wall work. So then they
Taking
should
away
take
from
take photos of the painting on their phone and like look at the painting separately outside the gallery. I don't know. Why? Yeah, I don't understand.
Well, I mean, something that we all commented on is it's a maximalist show. It's more is more is more. That's the experience. Absolutely.
Yeah, just like get in and just feel it. Like try to feel it. And if you can't, that's too bad. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the question is, I mean, had we thought about that part?
Yeah.
It never, I don't know.
I think
I mean,
and the group, the wonderful thing, I know the first thing that excites me when somebody says you want to be in a show with is that it's going to be a group and there's going to be so many conversations. And that's what's so exciting, because we're in our damn studios alone all the time. And especially after this past 18 months, it's just, to me, this show was so exciting to have different conversations and allowing your work. It's kind of like eating different foods, and then you get to taste it with this and this and this, and it's just, it's even better.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it's distracting. I think it helps. It's exciting. If anything. Yeah.
One thing that's confusing in the question, though, is that saying that the wall painting distracts from the actual work, but the wall painting is actual work as well.
Yeah.
So
that's funny. It makes me think about what Charo said earlier. Remember about like framing paintings all over the place, and like how that's like a much more, it's just the older way of doing it, or something that, she wanted to respond to, using this exhibition as a tool to do that. And I think that the fact that this question has come up is like, it really worked. Like you kind of did it. Yeah, you really did it. Yeah.
And it's also like sometimes like the whole more is more, or these very almost overstimulating experiences are inspiring. I know for me personally, when I enter a space that is just so over the top, that's when I feel most at peace. And that's, I feel like why I'm so comfortable using all of this material and, you know, painting on the wall and extending this and more color and large scale. It's like, this is what makes sense to me. This is like how I move through the world and how I see the world, as like all this kind of over the topness. And I think that is clearly, it comes through in the work, but yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, the distraction is part of the experience too, you know, and just as the overstimulation, I think it's the juxtaposition of all of these experiences that I think make this experience exhibition really exciting. So yeah.
Our next question is about the scale and the relationship of the works in the space and the relationship between paintings and materials that we've talked about. And a question for you, Rajni, what are your small objects? And can you or anyone else say something about those in relation to the large size of the space that these works foreground?
Yeah, I really like crossing scale, so that's a really fun thing for me. As in an art practice, I haven't had many. I don't have that much experience with arts practices, but it's like going from small to big and big to small actually helps you strengthen both types of composition work. Really, really, for me personally, it has helped me very much. So those are pieces. I'll tell you a quick story about making those pieces. I turned them by hand. I worked with the woodworker for my first show at the MoCA here in Toronto, or their first show, and that was my first museum show. And we hand turned an entire chair that was like a huge double throne. You saw it. I think we were trying to get that in, but something happened. It was too big. And then after that, I still had access to the lathe because the people in that wood shop are so sweet, and Yorgo's so sweet. So I just kept kind of turning poplar on a lathe, and I was just like turning some shape. I'm like, man, this is so science fiction architecture. I can make some really fun shapes that I love, and then also revealing wood grain. I love the texture of wood grain because for me it mirrors things like planetary surfaces, geology. Like it's a very macro thing to see natural texture like that develop on the surface of an object, and I didn't have anything to do with it. So just working with that and stuff, and I made like this group of objects that are negotiating the aesthetics of science fiction as belonging in fine art spaces. So I did it for Art Metropole, and there, you know, that's a store that's full of like heavily academic and literary arts writing and publication. So I just wanted to do that and put it in that space. It was for a holiday show, and they are in the property. They're in the collection of my art dealer. So so it was just like a really. And Charo, you like them, right? Did we suggest that to you, or you were like, can you bring these? I can't remember who wanted them.
Yeah, I can't completely remember myself.
Yeah,
I mean, like the relationship.
Yeah, and I really love how you were able to build that beautiful plinth for it. And I think it just looks like a console, like on a spaceship. And that's something that, yeah, I mean, it's the same sort of protrusions that are going on in my body dynamics work and my figurative work that's happening in these objects, right? I really love trajectories, projectiles, and parts of bodies, and you know, what do you say? Protuberances. Yeah, those types of things, like noses, ears going long. Like I really like that. For me, it speaks to like mutation as well, and changing bodies, changing places, and ideas. So I really liked. That's the story of those works in there. And yeah, I just play with the scale of it. I use the same ideas, and I try to like grasp at these notions of change.
Yeah, you know, there's a couple other questions. One that was sent in advance, and then one here in the Q&A about how the exhibition came together, and how I think it's getting at how I selected all of you as artists, but also the works in the exhibition. In thinking about the process that we each went through of selecting the works that we would show, part of it is that for me, I wanted it to represent your practice. So, you know, including those objects was important to me because you do make sculptural objects and to create kind of an installation experience. And
that's so funny. That's giving me that feeling back of your consideration of those artists, of those works.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, she sees the painterly in this sculpted work. That's
Yeah.
so kind or something. I had like that feeling. It's like, that's thoughtful. Anyway,
Well,
sorry.
and I wanted the exhibition to feel alive too, right? So I wanted to feel like each of you were represented in the work that you're making now, and not to be kind of like, here's a survey of 5 women painters or something. That I also made an effort to, just trust. I guess there's a lot of trust there too, in like what do you guys want to show individually, and what are you making right now in the studio? So to show your newer work, and then also to give you the walls that we have. Like one thing I was thinking about is also how painting shows in our space can often, it does look like postcards on these big walls that we have. There are 25 feet ceilings, and so I wanted it to feel immersive, and to offer you each the space to have large scale work, and then the other thing is that I didn't, something that we've already talked about a lot is that this isn't meant to be a survey of painting generally today, but there's a question for me still in like, what is painting today? And so let's look at it through the lens of, like women specifically. So it's kind of honing in on a smaller maybe slice of what's happening in contemporary painting. But as I think we've all come to, it's not really about painting either. It's about a lot more. It's about what you're all doing as artists. So I don't know if any of you want to add to, there's lots that I could talk about in terms of how a show comes together, but I'm hoping that the experimental nature of it all comes across for sure.
I think one of the things that always comes up, or certainly comes up again this time, is that painting is usually one of the things that artists do more and more. It's not just the only thing that we do. It's part of an overall practice, and certainly over the last probably 40, 50 years, that's what we're seeing with artists, and women are allowing themselves, just like every other artist, to not have to worry about doing any one thing all the time. And that we can cross, and we do cross inevitably. As Azadeh was saying earlier, when you're in the studio, it can be very circumstantial. It's whatever happens to be around, and whatever mood you happen to be in, and whatever gesture you happen to want to make and pick up that day, you generally try and express it somehow, and it becomes part of our overall practice, whether it's painting or drawing or sculpture. It all ends up in the same basket at some point.
It's all connected.
It's all connected.
Yeah, one of the great comments actually that was from a woman artist in Vancouver was, I wish we could put that category of painting aside. Focusing on painting can be a distraction. Thinking through materials, moving across materials and methods is what's important. So yeah,
categories all around are problematic.
Yeah, exactly. Well, on that, we don't have any more questions, but we're a bit over time. So any of you else, do you guys have any other things that you want to say before we close up here?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to meet all of you, and also to have your work here. So those of you who are watching and haven't seen the exhibition, have the opportunity. The show is up until Saturday. It closes on Saturday, the 18th. And we're open Tuesday to Saturday, 10 to 5. couple other notes is that if you had to leave early, or if you think that somebody else might be interested in this conversation, we will have the recording available on our website in the coming weeks, or if you want to watch it again. And also, please do watch for our upcoming programs. So go to our website at kag.bc.ca, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Kamloops Art Gallery. And thank you all for making time for this conversation, all of you artists and all of you out there in the virtual world. And we'll close it for now. Thanks. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.